Let's welcome Mel Reyes to discuss a guide to tackle cybersecurity with AI. While at Synchrony, Mel led the growth of the PayPal and eBay portfolio to make it the company's largest retail credit card customer in less than 2 years. He then moved on to manage the enterprise fraud and authentication and credit RPA efforts, saving and making the company millions of dollars in fraud prevention as well as enhancing customer onboarding acquisitions. He has over 20 years of experience as an independent consultant and is currently focused on advising SMB, enterprise, and startups in a virtual CIO CISO capacity in California. Over to you, Mel, to start your remarks.
Effectively, what we've seen in the last, I would say, decade or two has been a really huge transformation. And I want to take a quick look back into, where we've been. So back in the 2000s, we had the boom. Then we had, big data became the it thing. And effectively, throughout this time, government regulations and others have been really expanding the use of technology, expanding the security and the guardrails. So there's been a huge set of growth with the approach, whether it's API, whether it's interconnectivity. So as we fast forward through the last 5 to 10 years, AI has been an integral part of a lot of what we do, marketing, banking, et cetera. So what I wanted to do is just really focus on getting the groundwork of why there's a really big push for banking to include AI as part of the security models, as part of the marketing models, and then really kind of get down into some of the tactical things that folks can use. And a lot of it comes together with the existing InfoSec, AppSec, DevSecOps, and security models that a lot of the CISOs will implement. And in the same sense, we'll also be targeting acquisitions and marketing. So you really have to, pull those two together. But a lot of this, again, driven by the, PSD, second revision to secure data, GDPR, and a lot of other efforts. But really, it's about whether or not companies have been able to find value in their digital transformations, and then what else can they do to move that forward. So what I wanted to do is just take some snapshots of literally very recent articles that have come out that highlight, some of the key facts of what we're dealing with, right? The pandemic saw the surge of technology renaissance that a lot of companies had to go through. So you see a huge influx of digital technology that some banks, some credit unions, and others were not ready for. You see a huge influx of people who have a lot of time to hack and a lot of time to go through and determine that they have found different vulnerabilities that they can leverage. But you've also seen a lot of companies take advantage of that from a behavioral analysis and a recommendation standpoint. So you start to see, Personetics leveraging that and working with some major international banks to improve the user experience. Everyone is currently trying to find value, right? Again, a decade or two ago was finding value in big data and modeling. Now it's how to try to find value in leveraging AI. And because, and I'll talk about this in another slide, because of the lack of real returns on the digital transformation, there's been a push to edge out even more. And how do we get more from what we do and with the platforms that we've invested in? The gap for smaller banks and folks who don't have exactly the right budget is really, really hard for them to stay ahead. So companies, neobanks and challengers like Novo, Varo, and Monzo have really taken speed and taken charge. But there's also a huge influx of as-a-service models, lending as a service, banking as a service, open banking as a service. And when you look at those on the banking side, a lot of the vendor coordinations are going to be huge. All of those as a service companies are really also focusing on leveraging AI. And again, very tactically for acquisitions, but also for security. The investment, and this is where I referred to it from Accenture, the investment that has been made in the last 3 to 5 years has been really hard to quantify as a significant boost or lift to an existing return. And I have a lot of these reference articles and pieces that I could share with folks afterwards. But it's really interesting to have read it where there was a lift, but there wasn't a significant lift. So the companies are really targeting how to continue to both make money and save money, which is part of the strategy that they're using to implement with AI. I wanted to kind of highlight the impact of the security components within banking, and kind of just go back through some of the obvious things, right? These are metrics on the different fraud types as they were recorded almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. The reason I bring this up is, these are those key areas that a lot of banking institutions, a lot of financial services and fintech companies are looking to target. There's a myriad of companies that have very specific tactics and tools. A lot of them are aggregating, and there's going to be huge influx of vendors that are going to be pulling together a lot of their services or being bought. You saw Experian doing this recently, and a few others. So there's a huge influx of how do we pull together the right tools and tactics to be able to detect. Obviously, there's security realms on the infrastructure side and on the development side, like SolarWinds, but then there's also tactical pieces that we need to use with banking. This is just a short list of the different types of fraud components that banking and other institutions need to deal with. And I think the most important metric that I like here is 1 in 10 have been victims of identity fraud. So 1 in 10. So if you use that classroom example of look to your right, 4 people, look to your left, 5 people, one of you is going to be a victim to fraud. It's happening now. It's even more prevalent now. So who's taking advantage of AI in today's world? I mean, in reality, it should be everyone, but you have different sizes, scopes, scales of the company and their maturity levels. So some companies have made an investment, have the right mindset, are able to really leverage AI for their advanced components. And really, it is about modeling. It is about what you can do with the data that you have, and then really try to put that into whether it's marketing, security, or being able to create the personas around your customer experience, and really targeting them with predictively what they may be looking to do based on their behaviors and their patterns. There are a lot of little questions that come up around that, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes. But effectively, it is about creating a centralized view or centralized experience with the predictive models. The more data you have, the better, obviously, and the real true findings with machine learning or AI is the governance around how you're making sure that the decisions that are being made are in the best interest, also meet OCC and Reg guidelines. So I think that's one of those components that has been a little bit of a hurdle for a lot of banks to accept, because there is so much overhead around ensuring that the models and the logic that you use is quantifiable, is explainable, and doesn't fall into any discriminatory practices. So it's a little of a double-edged sword, where you want to make the advancements to make money, leverage money, save money, but you also have to be very accountable in a financial services industry. So when we're talking about banking and AI and security, there are very specific buckets that are very obvious to a lot of folks, but may not be as easy to implement. When you're talking about the detection and risk assessments, it's everything from an acquisition. You're applying for a loan, you're applying for a new account, all of the behavioral components around that experience, the digital experience, as well as even some, if there are any left, some brick and mortar components. You still have acquisition at the register. You still have a lot of different pieces there, and a lot of the neobanks and challengers have moved it all to digital with very slipstream components. Novo Bank for business accounts, Monzo, and a lot of different approaches. But in reality, what you need to be able to do is leverage the AI and ML if you can get it implemented within your organization correctly. So those are those pieces where you can pitch the better KYC, better AML. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the right models to support how you build out the infrastructure, the data, verifying the data, making sure that you can quantify these. A lot of these will be short failures for folks because it is a development and a process mindset that you have to get through. A lot of what I talk about when it comes to banking, AI, and security really also ties into just standard security work. So when you're talking about the end-to-end flow, what you're really doing is you're trying to make sure that you've got the provisions, the budget, and the accountability for the code that goes out and the information that comes in. And you have to do that through a set of different, a suite, I would say, of different tools and tactics. I'm a huge proponent of security, the security defined development process, right, as well as defense, defense in depth, and the latest buzzword, zero trust. But if your organization isn't putting InfoSec, AppSec, and DevSecOps as a primary core best practice in the beginning of a project before a single line of code is written, then you're really going to fall through on how you can deliver quickly, and then how you can deliver quickly and securely. There are a lot of vendors out there. There's a multitude of different vendors. It really depends on your scope, scale, and size of your company, your appetite for the features that they need. But at the end of the day, you should have some form of tool that has either AI, machine learning, or pattern recognition components to be able to decipher and to dig out of what could be a SolarWinds or a SQL, a different set of code injections, buffer overruns. So I'm a huge proponent of making sure that the development process, the back end that builds out the front, is really, really locked down. A lot of vendors are including AI in those implementations. Go back to your vendors, look through their offering, make sure that they're making you aware of the different capabilities, so that you can actually then work with your InfoSec teams, work with your CISO to say, by the way, last go round we were at X. I think we were actually better off because we're actually doing even more testing and better recognition of potential issues. The components around those implementing AI, every vendor that is of any worth in the last year or two is implementing some form of AI in their security products, right? So when you're talking about detection and response, you're talking about behavioral analytics, which is one of the hugest things that I absolutely implore everyone to look at. Or data, the legacy mindset of data layer protection, which has been super advanced lately, and the obvious, persistent threat detection. All of these are part of the core ecosystem for any company, but even more important because of the financial risks and identity risks in banking. So focusing on these four areas, and not just these four, obviously, or these 4 or 5, but even more, are going to be crucial to partner with your CISO, partner with your development teams, partner with your marketing teams to make sure that banking and security are leveraging the best components. Anything from dark trace to all the other different components around your current infrastructure, your development process, plus your existing user behavioral and inbound data. The other pieces that are very tactical from an acquisition flow, from a servicing standpoint, are going to be all the tools that you can use, all the different tactics, and how do you create a layer of multi-step waterfall to hate saying the word, but a set of steps or workflow that gives you even more validation and ability to be able to kind of make sure that the device, the person, the environment, the network, everything that they're coming in from is as validated as possible. There's a myriad of different tools, and this tool selection becomes a very big process of features over cost, obviously, but also really making sure that the companies are staying innovative, making sure that you're really leveraging the best tools and tactics, and then how do you build those? And are they using the best AI or other components in order to be able to create the models that you need to pull together with any of your existing customer profiles, omni-channel components, and again, going back to your MarTech, going back to all of the different vendor relationships to go through a feature assessment of, do they have AI in the roadmap, and do you need to go back and requalify and requantify how they're doing that, get their models, and then make sure that they're actually abiding by all the reg and all the OCC and all the other international guidelines. So there's a lot that's there, but it's going to be crucial for us to continue to move forward, especially with behavioral analysis and a lot of these pieces in banking, for us to stay on that. The tactical approach of the tools is probably the most important piece, but combined with how are you leveraging your data? So you go back to the decade-old, 2-decade-old big data component is, as you're building these profiles, as you're going through creating the personas, and are you able to create a anonymized, tokenized view of the customer so that you can really start to target personas, right? So you've got different demographics, you've got different components. Around this time last year, I worked with Oracle to build out a generalized profile of publicly available data for mortgages and in different areas, and pull that in together with metrics from the government. And you can really start to create a profile. This is with free public data. When you combine any of those with paid or your own custom data, you really should be able to get a core sense of, and depending on how quickly you can get to this, a real-time sense of the behaviors, the impact that your reach has on both national or international impacts, depending on your scope. But in reality, it comes down to putting in the technology that leverages AI, that has the checks and bounds and the guardrails, in order for you to build that view of the customer, right? The customer is the gold of how we move forward, and it really should be how we protect them as well, and making sure that you've got all of the international regulatory pieces in play. The last piece I wanted to really kind of touch upon is the importance of growth. The importance of growth and the importance of the impact on security and how we leverage the AI components. One of the biggest pieces that's been happening for the last few years is open banking, right? So you've got the PDR and a lot of other efforts, and GDP and GDPR and TCPA and all of the regulatory pieces that are really advocates for consumers. But at the end of the day, you also have changes. You have a lot of digital payments, a lot of digital components. You've got Venmo, PayPal, and every other player that's in there. You've got WePay and a lot of others who are really making a difference in the transactional and interchange fees and a lot of others. But as you take that into business and you take that into larger scale, open banking is going to be one of the biggest components around how companies, how individuals do their banking and interact with each other. Again, another opportunity to review, does open banking open up a floodgate of security issues that need to be addressed by behavioral patterns and threads? The growing markets in India and China, and the impact on any country, any group, or any company that needs to go from a certain level of digital interaction and just go past all of many layers of different things that a lot of companies have gone through for a few decades, and just leap into the latest digital footprint, whether it's wallets or Bitcoin or otherwise. All of these are going to be part of this growth that we're going to continue to see. And the competitive landscape will continue. So as we're looking at banking, fintech, as a service models, we need to take into account security. So red teaming as a service on an hourly, daily, real-time basis, DDoS as a service on a regular basis, removing the noise, but really also focusing on AI in those realms so that AI becomes an asset, and not necessarily a liability with regards to ethics and a lot of the issues that I also talk about in this realm when the models aren't necessarily quite right, but no one's put in the guardrails to actually validate or prove, that there may be bias or otherwise. And hopefully some of you folks have questions, or there's anything that I can help you with. And again, I have the links to a lot of this source, and I do speak on this quite a bit with regards to AI ethics as well.
Thank you for that brief presentation. I poll our audience, and 33% shared that cloud security is the biggest concern. The rest is split even across application security, network security, threat management, and ERP security. Do you have anything else to add to their takes on digital threats?
It's interesting. A lot of I would say the biggest play that we have, or the biggest issue that we have, is in locking down, where that security is, right? So the crown jewels, as I like to say, is, you've got the DLP. So, within an infrastructure, you've got, quite a few things. And if you're talking about ERP and a lot of these threat models, a lot of what we're seeing, the issue is a lot of these are slowly moving to the cloud, right? You've got IBM, you've got Cloudera, you've got a lot of things that are actually moving the core ERP out. So I'm going to go from bottom up, right? The threat network and application security, those are absolutely core to those injection points, right? So making sure that, because we're all, whether it's VPN, working from home, at a coffee shop, on the Wi-Fi, we're all subject to very specific things. So some of the onus will fall on the users to make sure that they've got updated devices, make sure that they've got some form of VPN software or otherwise. But in reality, what it comes down to is at that edge, right? So when you're creating an infrastructure, or as a CISO at the edge, you have to be able to detect bot managers. You have to be able to bots, as well as the behavioral pieces. It's a insane task to do when you're doing it at volume, but that's why you rely on the vendors that can actually do this, to be able to do the analytics. The most important piece with cloud is making sure, and almost all of these, is making sure that your teams are trained properly, right? So there's the biggest piece that I find is the features and configurations that are released as part of any new effort, whether it's cloud, Kubernetes, Docker, or any other container-based pieces, is that there are assumptions that are made, because it's cool, the latest cool tool, and everything gets pushed out, but they don't take into account that they shouldn't be just using out-of-box configurations. They need to be customized to their environment. You need to have deep training, and you need to make sure that you bring the right people to the table when you're doing these assessments. Excuse me. So when you're looking at all four of these, or all five of these, it really is a scope, scale, size piece of how do you find the right tools, lock down, educate, and then make sure you remove any of the noise from the security models. When very specifically with banking and AI, it has the security realm around it, right? The basic CISO, why CISOs lose sleep, right? But it really is also about the modeling and the ethics around. Yes, that's great that Darktrace and everybody else can do network and behavioral analysis, but what are you doing from a customer 360 view to be able to make sure you've got a behavioral analysis there? So there's different systems that'll do that. So for example, they'll do trending. Mel logs in typically on Tuesday and Saturday night between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. to check his bank account balance. All of a sudden, I see, and he's in California. All of a sudden, I see Mel logging in at 4:30 in the morning from New York. Do I raise the suspicion level and actually trigger an authentication, even though he's previously been authenticated on this quote unquote device, right? So when you travel, when your device gets stolen, all of these things should trigger a behavioral bump, but a lot of that, can be used as a generic profile as well. So when you talk about AI, you can say, oh, there's probably a big influx of why, for example, disasters. Why is there an influx of everybody checking their account at 3 o'clock? Well, if you start seeing a lot of your customers checking their account around 3 o'clock, maybe there was a stock market piece, maybe there's a natural disaster or similar, where folks want to make sure that everything's secure. So you don't have to immediately raise threats, and you might be able to reduce noise by using that analysis through AI and ML.
With decades of IT strategic plannings and information security experience for well-known companies and Fortune 500s, what are some attributes that set you apart from your peers in shaping how you lead and maintain your role as a chief transformation officer or chief change management officer?
I like to talk about wearing the hat of chief information, chief integration, and all the other innovation. Right, the role of the CIO has transformed, and the role of the CISO has transformed, and a lot of the pieces that I take from my too many decades of learning is there's always a budget crunch. There's always a need. There's always the need to identify risk versus reward, the benefits. It really does come down to being able to be at the table with management to talk about what the specific impact is for each company. Right? There's a different set of important factors for each company. What do they need to protect, and how? Right, and then what is that risk level? And I think for me, the piece that I find as my superpower isn't just the ability to be able to analyze that, but it's also to be able to address how the teams that I build can do that, right? And what do I need to do to level them up, to upskill them, to maybe actually move them into a different role, because they're actually better for a completely different role, which may not be security related or IT, information systems related, but really making sure you leverage your resources and identify when you need help. Right. I think that's one of the biggest pieces that a lot of folks don't realize, is that they feel that they have to be constrained to that, very specific set of folks or rules or otherwise. So to me, I think the most important thing is really understanding the landscape of your resources, and then really fighting for the what you need. Right. And I think that what set me apart from others is I see it clearer and easier, right, from a logistical standpoint, to be able to say, yes, that's fine. You could throw tactical tools at it. That's great. But are those really achieving what we need? Can we possibly consolidate some of these? Can we think outside the box? And I say this all the time. I ask, why? Why are we doing that? I ask, what if we did this? And then when somebody comes, up with with their pom poms and cheering that they've got the best ideas since sliced bread, and I'm like, well, a lot of people have already done that. So I just ask them, what if? I mean, so what, right? So what, right? So because a lot of times you want to differentiate yourself from other people. So I think that's the most important thing, is to be supportive, to understand the landscape, the threat, and the appetite, and then just being able to really ask the questions.